We're now on Daf Tes Vavam and Beis, and we're trying to prove from a Mishnah in Ksubas on Daf Mem Aleph, substantiate the shita of Rav Papa that Palgad and Nizka, Chatzi Nezek of a short time, is Mamona. And therefore, if a person would come forward in Bezdin and confess that his short time, damaged somebody else's property, he would pay based on his hodah, because shor tam pays chatzi nezik de mamona. The Mishnah says in Ksubis, Hamis shorias poni, a man comes into Bezdin and he confesses that his shor killed a man. Or alternatively, he says, my shor killed shoro shel ploni, killed another shor that belongs to so-and-so. Hareza mishalem al piatzmo. Now, this is almost explicit, like Rav Papa, that a shor tam pays chatzi nesek b'toras mamon, and therefore mishalim al piatzmo. If you were to argue that chatzi nezek, like Rav Huna, is knasa, then moed v'knas is potter. But my lab betam, and the Gemara says lo b'muad. You assume that the Mishnah is talking about a shor tam. Maybe the Mishnah is talking about a shor muad, and certainly, according to everyone, in the case of shor muad, the Torah wants to come down full brunt on the mazik, the bala shor, and he pays mamona, and therefore he's mishalim al piatzma. So Gemara asks the question about tam ma. What would be the din had it been a short time? When the Mishnah there in the Sefer wants to give a case of a knas where hodas hamischayev is not, it does not generate a chiyuv. And what example does the Mishnah give in that Sefer? Hamish shori es avdol shel ploni is eina mishalem al piatzmo. If he comes into Bezdin and he confesses that my shor killed an eved, and we have a knas called shloshim shel eved. And why did the Mishnah, asks the Gemara, have to stretch its arm out to a case of Shosha Hamis? Why not talk about a case of Shosha Nogach? But instead of a Shor Muad, talk about a Shor Tam on the first three Negichas and Eino Mishalim al Piatzmo, because we're holding, according to Rav Huna, that Palagad in Nizka Kirasa. Liflog v'lisni b'dida. Why do you stretch your arm out all the way to Shosha Harag? Even a Shosha Nogach is Eino Mishalem al Piatzmo to shor tam, according to Rav Huna. And the Mishnah should have said, when does a person have to pay damages based on his own confession? That's only in a shor muad of betam, Eino Mishalem al Piatzmo. And for the fact that the Mishnah omitted this distinction, and the halacha of Eino Mishalem al Piatzmo in shor hanogeach shor, in the case of a shor tam, it seems to indicate that the halacha is like Rav Huna, like Rav Papa, that palgad nizka mamona, and the Gemara rejects it. Kula b'muad kamayri. The Bryce is talking about a case of muad. It's not talking about a case of tam, and therefore, within the dinim of a shor muad, we know that modeh is chayev, mishalim al piatzmo, and the only difference would be in a shor muad that kills a person, which is a knas. Now the Gemara again wants to bring a raya to a papa the palgad nizka mamona from the following brisa Toshma. Ze'aklal kol she'amishalim yoser al mashehizik eino mishalim al piatzmo. The brisa formulates the guidelines and the rules for a knas. And the guideline is that you pay more than what you are mazik, implying that if you're paying less than what you are mazik, that's not a knas. That's momo. My love, shouldn't we be medayik from the lashon of the brisa that pachos mimashe hizik, if it was less than the amount that he was matzik, like the case of chatzi nezek, then mishalim al piatzmo, because the only definition of knas is when he's mishalim yoser mimashe hizik, implying that pachos mimashe hizik in chatzi nezek of shor tam does not qualify as a knas. he would Mishalim al Piatzmo, and that would support the Shita of Rav Papa. And the Gemara rejects. Lo, that's not the way to read the Mishnah. Your diuk is not correct. What it means is when it says Mishalim Yosem Mashehizik, when would it be Mammon and Mishalim al Piatzmo? Kimoshehizik Mishalim. Only if he pays the amount of money that he damaged. The Gemara asks the following kasha: Avol pochos my is hachinami lo mishalimi. If you're telling me that if it's less than mashizik, then the same din applies. That it's a knas and he's not mishalim al piatzmo. Ihachi adetani. Why does the Mishnah use this strange language of zaklal kol mishalim yosem mashizik and mishalim piatzmo? Listen, it should have said it directly, explicitly. Zaklal kol she'eda mishalim kama shehizik. Just said if he's not paying exactly the amount of money that he was mazik, either more or less, the mashma pachos or mashma yosef is tiyufta. This is a kasha on Rav Huna. Now, if we would freeze the frame at this moment, we would say that la halacha, it seems that all of the proofs, and especially the last one, would support the Shita Rav Papa, the Palgadiska Momona. But yet, the Gemara adds, V'hilchas a Palgadiska Knasa. Frek the Gemara, how can you say that? Tiyuvta v'hilchasa? You just upshlugged Rav Huna of Palgadiska Knasa. Now you're going to turn around and paskin like Rav Huna? In time of my Havi Tiyuvta. What was the difficulty of this brisa that we asked as a kasha against Rav Huna? Mishum delo ketani kimoshe hizik. It should have said that the case of mammon is only when he pays kimoshe hizik. No, the brisa didn't have the luxury to write kimoshe hizik. Why? Because we're going to have a case where it's kimoshe hizik. And I'm sorry, it's less than Kmoshe Hizik, and yet it's Momon. What would be a case where he pays less than Masha Hizik and it's Momon, even according to Rav Huna? That's the case of Chatzi Nezik Tzroros. Shalom Psiko Lekeva the Ika Chatzi Nezik Tzroros the Hilchasa Gemirale the Momonahu is Mishum Hachilo Ketani. The Bryce had to avoid a very dangerous language that Kmoshe Hizik, as if to say that in every case where he's paying either more or less than the hezek, then it's knas. That's not so, because here's a case where it's less than kamoshe hezek, and yet it's not considered a knas. It's considered momona and mishalim al piatzva. That's chatzi nezik tzroros, which is halacha l'Moshe misinai. Gemara says v'hashta di'ameh palgadis k'knasa. Now that you've come to the conclusion that we paskin like Rav Huna, that Chatzi Nezek V'Shortam is Knasa. We have a rule that Ein Govin Knasos B'Bavel, which means that in Bavel the Dayanim are not Musmachim. They don't have the authority of a smicha in order to impose and force a person to pay a knas. And therefore, we're going to give a whole scenario of cases where the chiyuv of the keren is a knas, and it cannot be collected in Bavel. Palgadin is knasa hai kalba diachol imri, a kelev that eats a sheep. Sheep is a big animal. For a kelev to eat, swallow up a sheep, that's called ein darko b'kach, and that would be a shor tam. Shunra diachol tarnagola. Whoever saw a cat swallow up a chicken or a hen, mishunu. Now the word mishuna is automatically indicative of keren. Why? Because keren is considered mishuna. It's not the natural, normal behavior pattern for an animal to go out and belligerently kill another shore. And therefore, Bavel, because in Bavel, as we said before, they weren't considered smuchin and mumchin, and they cannot collect and enforce the law of knas. And this is based on a Gemara later on at Daf Pei Daled Amud Beis. The Gemara there clarifies what dinim require smuchim and what dinim do we apply the principle of anan v'shlichusa derabanan Sinon, meaning that we here in Chutz La'aretz, in Bavel, are shluchim of Eretz Yisrael. Says the Gemara the following: Hani mili beravrave. If you're talking about a large sheep or a very mature fat hen, that's unusual. Aval bezutri, if you have a small animal, urchehu, a kelev or a chatul, a cat, will actually devour a small animal. And that becomes a told of Shane and Keren because the animal is interested in Hanos Atzmo. It's not Keren Mishuna. And therefore, in such a case, the Nezek will pay Nezek, the Mazik will pay Nezek Sholem. We can collect it in Bavel like any other case of Shane and Regel because it's Mammon and not Knas. Furthermore, even in Bavel, there is a possibility that the Nizak would collect Chatzi Nezek Knosa. How so? If, let's say, before he gets to Bezdin, the Nizak goes ahead and grabs on to some metaltalin that belonged to the Mazik, that's called Tfisa, then Lo Mafkidim would not, Bezdin's not going to force him to cough it up and confiscate it from his possession. The Omar Kovolizim Lazlinam La'ard Yisrael, if the Nizak demands in Bezdin that the Mazik come with him to Eretz Yisrael where there are Smuchid and Mumchin that could be Mechayev him to pay Chatzi Nezek Knosa, then Kavinale. Bezdin will decide that we're going to give you a period of time. We're talking to the Mazik, give you 30 days, and within 30 days, you have to go to Eretz Yisrael, and there the Nizak is going to litigate against you and demand that you pay the Chatzi Nezek. Ilo Asal, the Mazik says, I'm not going to Eretz Yisrael. I checked online, and El Al is charging $1,800 for a ticket to New York. He's Meshamtina Lev. We put him into Shamta, into Nidu. He is a Sarvan. He's refusing the mandate of Bezdin. Now, I have to assume, I didn't find anyone who says this, that the Nizak brought Eidim into Bezdin. I mean, just because the Nizak says to Bezdin, this Mazik owes me Chatzi Nezek because his shor damaged my shor, we're not going to believe him and force the Mazik to buy a ticket to Eretz Yisrael, and if not, we put him into Nidud. But I think, therefore, we have to assume that the Nizak brought two Eidim into Bezdin, and they testified that indeed this Mazik's shor damaged the Nizak's shor. Ubenkach. The shor is already on its way to be a very dangerous animal, very belligerent. And it could be a societal menace and threaten society to leave this shor unsupervised. Maybe we shouldn't even leave it alone. And therefore, benkach, whether or not the Nizak comes into Bezdin and demands that there be kovei zman to litigate in Eretz Yisrael, or he doesn't do so, Bezdin gives a warning to the Bala Shor, the Bala Mazik, and they say to him, look, you got a dog that's a very dangerous dog. You have a cat that's a very dangerous cat. And therefore, if he doesn't take that into consideration, and the Mazik doesn't take those measures that would guarantee that his kelev or his chatul is not going to damage someone else, then Meshamtinale will put him into cherem ad mesalik hazeka. Now, the phrase mesalik hazeka means sheyarog es hamazik. However, as we see the hemshech of the sugya, we're going to mention the Rambam Shita that he doesn't have to actually kill the animal, but he has to provide a very tight security over the animal And we'll see why the Rambam holds like that. Either Rabbi Nosson, Desanya, Rabbi Nosson, Ominayin, Shol Yigadol Adam, Kelev Rabbatov Beso, Val Yamid, Sulam Rabbatov Beso, Tamid Lomelo, Sosim, Dom Vesecha. Right, just like the Torah says that you have to put up a makeh, a fence around your roof so that no one will chashon fall off the roof, so too, you're not allowed to have in your possession a kelev ra, like a rabid dog, or a sulam ra, some sort of faulty ladder. Somebody's going to chas v'sholom kill himself by climbing up this ladder. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on the bottom of Tesvavam and Beis. Now, we mentioned that the Rambam has a slightly different shita here. Rashi and the Rosh will assume that in the case of the Kelev and the Shunra, the cat, we have to put it to death. The Rambam is more compassionate on the animals, and he says that maybe if the animal exhibits a very extremely dangerous behavior pattern, like, for example, the Kelev asa pu'ula meshuna b'yosa shenilcham in bal chai gadol mimen. The Kelev starts up and kills an animal that's larger and greater than him. But in a normal case, he says, where there's a shinui shelo kol kach gadol, then ein mechayvim es bal hakelev lahor. The Mishnah says, Chamisha tamim v'chamisha mu'adim. There are 5 cases of nizke behema, which is called tam. Tam means that you only pay chatzi nezek because it's meshuna. And there are 5 cases of mu'adim where the Baal Ashar will have to pay nezek shalom. Now we get to the 5 tamim. Ha-behema enemu edes. It's not anticipated. It's rather meshuna. Lo ligach, v'lo ligof, v'lo lishoch, v'lo lirbot, v'lo livot. None of these actions of damage are expected from an animal, from a shar ta. And therefore, in all these cases, you pay chatzi nezek. Hashen, here are the 5 cases of mu'adim, mu'edis lechos haroila, a regel mu'edis lishbar derech hilucha, shara mu'ad, and shara mazik, so all these cases of muad are very simple. You know, an animal eats and it walks and breaks whatever in its path, and the shamud has already proven with his 3-part record that he's a belligerent animal, and Adam is always muad liol. However, with regard to shar mazik versus nizak, here we're going to say that he's a muad and he pays nezek shalom, even though it's a short time. This sounds like Rabbi Tarfon, and we'll get to that in the Gemara. The Mishnah now gives you a list of animals that are very dangerous by their very nature, and therefore they are considered mu'adim mitchilasan, and they'll pay nezek shalom right off the bat. We don't wait. There's no tamus. Haze'ev, a wolf. Ha'ari, a lion. Hadov is a bear. And by the way, I think the bear is the most dangerous of this whole list. Va'nomer is a lekbird. Va'baras, we don't know what a baradilus is. The Gemara is going to try to figure that out. Va'nochash, and a serpent. Harei elu mu'adim mitchilas priyosam, and therefore they don't go through a state of tamus. According to Kamma, they pay nezek shalom already on the first damage. However, the question is, can you take any of these animals and domesticate them? And that's the shita of Rabbi Elazar here. Bisman shehem b'nei tarbus. If you raise these animals and you train them and domesticate them, then ena mu'adim, they aren't considered mu'ad mitchilasan, and for the first 3 times of damage, you only pay chatzi nezek, but the nachash is mu'ad li'ol. Now, it's even Rabbi Elazar agrees in the case of a nachash that he is existentially a mazik. And as much as you think you could train a snake, don't even bother trying. The Gemara says, we're talking about the chatzar hanizak, meaning that Reuven's animal was eating from the fruits of Shimon in Shimon's domain, because Shein v'regel apoter b'shus harabim, they're only chayav b'shus hanizak, and yet v'ktoni behema enemu edes l'shalim kulo aval chatzi nezik m'shalemes. So in the case of negifa, and so forth, the Baal Hashor will pay only chatzi nezik on the first three negichos, and he only pays nezik shalom after the third. Now, it's logical to assume that the Mishnah in the Reish and the Seifa is talking about the same Rishus. It's one Rishus. And yet, we're saying that the animal in a Chotza Nizak only pays Chatzi Nezek on the first three Negichas. That's against Rabbi Tarfa. Mani, who is the author of the Mishnah? We can attribute the Mishnah to Rabbanani, the Amri Meshuna Keren, B'Chatzer Nizak, Chatzi Nezek Hudu Mishalim. That in the case of Keren, which is called Meshuna, and all its tolos are Meshuna, and it damages in the Chatzer Nizak, then it pays Chatzi Nezek. So it has the same din as a Keren Tama B'Shus HaRabim. Is Ema Sefer, but what are you going to do with the Sefer? It says Shor Amud, V'Shor Mazik B'Shus HaNizak, V'Ha Adam. And in those cases, of the five Mu'adim, amongst them are Shor Amud and a Shor Tam that was Mazik in B'Shus HaNizak. That's the Shita of Rabbi Tarfa, that a Shor Tam B'Shus HaNizak pays Nezek Sholem on the first Negicha. Is Asan lit Rabbi Tarfa, the Omer Meshuna Karen B'Chatza Nizak Nezek Shalom and Shalom is Reisha Rabbanim V'Sefer Rabbi Tarfa in the Omer Lei. We've had this in the past. Shmuel says to Rabbi Yehuda Shinino, you're a very sharp chacham. Shvok Masnisan, don't work so hard to try to reconcile the Mishnah. V'Tav Asrai, come in my to go walk in my footsteps. Reisha Rabbanim V'Sefer Rabbi Tarfa. It's not so terrible. Now the Gemara offers another alternative answer to the steer in the Mishnah. Rabbi Lezer Mishmei the Rav Omar. Here we're going to turn to Daf Tez Zayin. Kula Rabbi Tarfon he. The entire Mishnah should be attributed to Rabbi Tarfon. Reisha, where he pays on Shein for Regel Nezek Sholem and for Keren Chatzi Nezek. We're not talking about the Chotzer Nizak. Well, it is the Chotzer Nizak, but it's not a Chotzer Nizak Gemura totally, but rather b'Chotzer Miu'edes lePeiros li'efebem. In other words, the Nizak and only the Nizak has rights to bring his Peiros into that Chotzer. And Lozevel Lezel Shvarim, but both the Mazik and the Nizak have rights to go into that Chotzer with Shvarim. To L'gabi Shein Havile Chotzer Nizak. With regard to Shein, this is called Chotzer Nizak simply because the Nizak has exclusive rights, Lafuki the Mazik, to bring his payros into that Chotzer. But L'gabi Keren Havi Rishus HaRabim. The Chotzer is considered Rishus HaRabim L'gabi Keren, in which case even Rabbi Tarfon would say that you pay Chatzi Nezek for the first three Negichos. And the reason for this is because both have Rishus to bring in the Shvarim. So therefore it's called Rishus HaRabim. And as we said before, if it's Rishus HaRabim, then even Rabbi Tarfon agrees that the Baal Hashar Mazik only pays Chatzi Nezek on the first three damages. But in the Seifa, that a Shor Tam was Mazik in the Rishus Nizak, then Enochinami you would pay Nezek Sholem in a Chotzer that's Legamrei Shal Nizak, not only for Peiros, but even for Shvorim. And therefore, Rabbi Tarfon holds that you pay Nezek Sholem. So this is where we'll stop here on Daf Tez Zayin Amud Aleph Omar Rav Kahana. And let me take this opportunity to thank you for a good week of learning and wish you a quiet Shabbos. Mirz Hashem, we should hear good news. Shabbat Shalom.